On 10th February 2025, the Office of the Deputy Governor launched the public education and consultation process for the proposed Human Rights Commission Bill 2025. Here to give you a little bit more insight and information for what this proposed piece of legislation means to you. From the Office of the Deputy Governor, my name is Eusa Z. Adams, and welcome to this very special GIS report. And I'm happy to be joined by Permanent Secretary in the Premier's Office, Mrs. Carolyn Stoutt Igwe. Thank you for being here with us today, PS.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Adams.
And we have from the Office of the Deputy Governor, Security and Justice Policy Advisor, Mrs. Olva McKenzie-Agard. Thank you for being here with us,
Thank
Mrs.
you for
Agard.
having me.
So we're here to discuss the proposed Human Rights Commission Bill. It is important in our discussion today to take a step back, and I'll speak to you firstly, PS. This piece of legislation is not new. It's been around for a while. Can you take us through a little bit about the history of this Human Rights Commission Bill?
Okay, so going back further than the Human Rights Commission Bill would be the Constitution in 2007, where provision was made for a Human Rights Commission to be established. So in order for the commission to be established, there's a need for legislation. So I think it was back in about 2014 that there was a first introduction and first reading of the bill. And since that time, it has been introduced and deferred over a number of times. Actually, many of the times it came in, it was deferred, and then the session was either prorogued or dissolved because it was an election, and you had to reintroduce the bill. The last time, according to the records that I have seen, it was reintroduced back in 2018. It was debated in the House of Assembly, and then again, it was placed in a committee. And it has surfaced again because I know that the Premier in particular has asked for it to come back on the scene because of the fact that we are approaching, you would know that we had another constitutional review last year. And in a couple months, we will be doing constitutional negotiations. So in order for it to, he has requested, because this is one of the provisions that was made possible in the 2007 Constitution, but it has not yet been enacted. So he has really requested that the bill comes back in the forefront so we can have stakeholder consultation on it. I know that back in 2018, when it was debated in the House, many members felt that we did not do enough consultation on the bill. It was introduced at that time by the Attorney General, but it was not, they felt that there was not enough consultation for the public and public input given the implications of the bill. So we are here today in support of the public consultation process that was requested back then. It has taken us a while to get here because of the fact, I think everybody would know that for the past 2 years, the focus has been COI implementation. So in order to make sure we get through the majority of the legislation, we are now back here now that we have more focus to be able to advance it, to obtain public service, to obtain public consultation.
So, PS, you've given us the rich history of the bill there, but I really like where you started. In order to first fully understand a Human Rights Commission bill, you have to understand what our human rights are and what establishes them. And I'll turn to you now, Mrs. Agard. Before we dive into the contents and the provisions of this bill, let's have a conversation firstly about what are our human rights, where they can be found.
Okay, so I'll start where PS start, the Constitution. If you look on the Chapter 2 of the Constitution, there are a number of human rights listed there. Freedom of expression, right to found a family, right to education, they're all listed there. But in addition to the Constitution, there are a number of international human rights instruments that form or are part of our wholesale human rights. For example, civil and political rights, economic and social rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. All of these outline various human rights for each person. Some are general, but then again, like for example, the Convention of the Rights of the Child, they're for specific groups. We have also CEDA, which is the Convention for Women. So there are some conventions that are specific to particular groups of persons, but then there are also those that are general, like I mentioned, the civil and political rights and economic and social rights. So all of those instruments, in addition to the Constitution, really encompasses all of our human rights.
So I think that's a good point that you made, that our rights are not just only defined by those fundamental freedoms listed in the Constitution, but as a territory, we adhere to these international standards and some of these that are expected of modern countries.
Yes.
So pointing back to this piece of legislation, this Human Rights Commission bill, in essence, what are we trying to accomplish?
So Section 34 of the Constitution requires us, or give us the legal footing to establish a Human Rights Commission. The ethos of this entire bill is simply that, the establishment of a Human Rights Commission to ensure that persons' rights are protected and promoted. And that is, in summary, the essence of what this bill is doing.
And P.S., I think when we're talking about things like this, a Human Rights Commission is important, surely, at a governance level.
Correct.
But persons might not understand what this means for them as the individual, how this is going to impact their lives. Can you shed a little bit of light of why persons should pay attention in this process and lend their input?
I think it's important for persons to give the input on this because, as Ms. Agard outlined, the rights are specified in the Constitution. So if you realize that your rights are being violated, this commission now paves the way for you to have an opportunity to sit with a commission, to make your complaint to the Human Rights Commission, to have a hearing and to get some kind of redress in the situation. Because right now we know we have other institutions like Complaints Commission, but this one will deal specifically with human rights as outlined in the Constitution, many of the conventions that have been extended onto us. Right now, I'm thinking back on when I worked in the Ministry of Health and Social Development, the one that we were asked whether we were ready to receive in terms of being extended as a Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That is something that we were hoping that by now would have been extended to the territory, because I believe in fighting for those who can't fight for themselves. But a convention like that has not yet been extended to us. But we know that, as those that Mrs. Agard mentioned already, many of them have been extended to us as a territory. A number of us are not familiar with some of these conventions that have been extended to us, but the fact that they've been extended, we have a right to adhere to what their provisions, and we have a right to adhere to the Constitution, what is stated in the Constitution. So this bill makes it possible for persons to be able to air their concerns, and then to also understand that, okay, I knew I had a right, but I didn't know what to do if I felt my rights were being violated.
And I think that's a good place, because this proposed piece of legislation distinctively says that you can file complaints against a very specific group of individuals or bodies. Mrs. Agard, can you shed light on who we can, once this legislation is enacted, who we will be able to file complaints against?
Anyone. So essentially, if a person feel that your right to a particular, or your particular human right has been infringed or has been violated, whether it's against a person, a group of persons, statutory body, a public officer, essentially you can come before the commission. The persons or the group of persons are so wide that it really incorporates everyone. It doesn't matter.
And P.S., one of those groups that the bill sheds light on that we would be able to file complaints against, and to list it out, it says individuals, public officers, government departments, unincorporated and incorporated companies. How should persons be preparing themselves for such a shift?
I think it's important, and I think before I answer that, I want to emphasize that this is just a consultation process.
Yes.
The bill is not yet passed
not,
because
yeah.
there is a concern out there that the bill has been passed and people don't know anything about it. But we are back to where we should have been, where we left off many years ago. We are consulting the public. So it's important for people to understand this is a consultation
Yes.
phase. The bill is out there, the draft bill is out there. If you have any concerns, this is
This
your
is the time,
opportunity
especially
to
on
say,
sections like
to
these,
say
yeah.
what exactly you think about it. So getting back to your question now, which I almost forgot, I think. But getting back to your question, what was it again?
So we want to know
Okay.
if this bill makes it through to be enacted in this
Right.
state, saying that you can file complaints against absolutely anybody,
Okay.
any
Okay.
company. How can you prepare for something like that?
Right. So it means that all of us, especially those of us in public spaces, public offices, we should be familiarized. We too should be familiarizing ourselves, because sometimes when we say public consultation, we think it's just for members of the public. But we are the ones who are in government offices. We deal with
Yes.
people on a daily basis. Many times persons will complain. We have a customer care service center. People would complain and say, well, this is the way I was treated.
Yes.
But when persons understand that their rights have been violated, then it means that they should be familiar. I mean, we've had a constitution since 2007, so
Yes.
by now we should all be familiar with our rights.
Yes.
But in the event that you are not familiar with your rights, now that the commission is getting ready to be established, it is time to really say, okay, let me take some time and go through Chapter 2 of the Virgin Islands Constitution, and then I need to compare what is being proposed in this human rights bill to see how I go about making my complaints,
Right.
to see what do I need to do, and then also to have an understanding of who is going to become who is going to comprise this commission. Can I trust these people to deal with me fairly? Because that's always a concern for some people, in that they want to know who are the members of these commissions, because some people feel that some people can be impartial, so
Right.
they feel like they're not going to get a fair hearing. But certainly, with the constitution behind of you,
Yes.
with this bill
Yes.
once enacted behind of you, you definitely are armed and dangerous, actually, because you have something that you can hold people
Yes.
accountable with.
And I'm happy that you said that, PS, because the bill makes a provision for the independence of the Constitution. And can you speak, you or Mrs. Agard, speak to the importance of that, especially in maintaining public trust in the process?
Okay.
Just for clarity, independence of the Constitution.
Sorry, the commission.
Independence of the commission.
Okay.
So just before I answer your question, let me add to what PS Igwe said. I want to add to feedback. So the process that we use at the Office of the Deputy Governor in preparing, or when we would like a draft bill, is to prepare drafting instructions. Where we are now is the consultation process, meaning that the draft has come back from the AG chambers and then we come to the public for consultation. I want to highlight here, every feedback given, every comment made is read and taken seriously. And if required, when we go through those comments, we come back into the bill and make changes. So we often make changes to a proposed draft bill based on the comments and feedback made. Now, in relation to the independence of the commission, how these commissions are set up, and the draft bill will speak to that, is that the commissioners are independent, they have immunity, they have the particular budget separate and apart from the consolidated fund, in addition to other funds coming in, and they essentially stand alone, especially this type of commission. It has its own independence. It's not controlled or directed by anyone. The commissioners are nominated by a particular group of persons, including the governor, the premier, a leader of opposition, chief justice, and then they're appointed by the governor. And they stand separate and apart within that commission.
And that's important because, and still, while the commission will be independent, as government, we have a responsibility to support it in its functions, ensure that it's able to carry out these investigations on behalf of the people. Can you speak to the support that this commission will receive from the government side?
Okay, so the funding will come from the government for the office, and also the commission. In addition to the commissioners, you have the Human Rights Commission, but you also have a chief executive officer who's going to be overseeing the commission. So it's an organization that it will be headed by a chief executive officer who's not just Joe Blow from off the street. The person has to be a lawyer with a certain number of years experience to be, and then there'll be support staff. I guess it depends on how busy the commission becomes. I assume that once people understand that the commission is set up and they understand what they need to do and how they can make complaints about different things, I believe that they might get busy after a point in time. But I think our responsibility in the public service is to make sure that they don't have too many complaints by making sure that we do, especially because a number of us ministries, departments, we are governed by different legislation. And we have a responsibility to know the legislation that governs each of our departments, each of our ministries. Because the minute you violate, gone are the days when people will say, well, the legislation, they went to the House of Assembly, they passed legislation. There are a number of persons who are very active in following what happens in the House of Assembly. So it's up to us to really make sure that we adhere to the legislations that govern our ministries and departments, because when persons know that they can make these complaints and they can come, they will start coming.
And not necessarily that's a bad thing.
Right.
Persons should fully understand their rights, and they should fully be able to stand on them and feel comfortable in saying, I believe that these basic rights that I am entitled to have been violated. And Mrs. Agard, if we could look a little deeper into the legislation, let's say someone makes a complaint, an investigation is done, and the commission reaches a decision. Can you shed some light about what persons can expect at the end of the investigation process? Well,
it really depends on what comes out of that investigation. So after the investigator does his work, he or she then prepares a report. It's submitted to the commission, and depending upon what comes out of that, the commission can either decide not to take this matter forward, dismiss it. The commission can also decide to refer this matter to the relevant authorities because of whatever was found in that investigation. But all in all, a feedback would be given to the complaint in writing about the outcome of that matter. So the commission is always in communication with the person making the complaint, especially to let them know this is where we're at, and it's done in writing. I want to also point out here, the complaint can either be in writing or orally. Somebody doesn't always have to write into the commission. You can just walk into the commission and say, this is my problem. This is what has happened to me. And then the commission will then take that in writing and decide what they will do with that.
That is important, and I think it goes back to one of the releases we recently made on the bill. We're ensuring that the process of filing complaints is accessible to persons. And one of the key provisions, PS and Mrs. Agard, is that it's free of cost.
Yes.
There is no cost associated with filing or even asking for an investigation to be started.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the point of not that everything doesn't have to be written, I think is a good provision, because we all know that there are persons in the community who might have a challenge with reading.
Yes.
So if you have a challenge with reading, you have a challenge with writing. Wow. And persons need to feel that there's nothing prohibiting them from making a complaint. Yes. That if you feel that you're being disenfranchised for whatever reason, that if I can't read, I mean, nobody will hear my complaint. So I think the provision for oral complaints is a good one, because we need to cater for everyone.
Everyone in this
You understand?
territory,
Because everyone has human rights, so it cannot be, I have a right to education, that's what we know we have. But in the event that you didn't have that, because we have people from all over, in the event that you had any shortcomings in that area, you should not feel that you can't make a complaint.
And while we're here, can we, both of you, is there any part of this bill that you think persons should definitely be aware of?
Aware of in the sense that you know what you can do or what the commission will do. So the commission has a myriad of functions. There are a number of things it can do. P.S. Igwe alluded to a few of them, like the investigation and making the complaints, but the commission also does required to do public awareness, visit detention centers, speak to prisoners without any authority figure within the prison there, really to get from the prisoner or the person that is in detention
Because
what's happening.
Even the Constitution establishes these rights for persons who are incarcerated.
Right.
So that's
So-
important.
Yes, so that persons will know the functions of the commission, so they know that this is exactly what the commission will do, and this is what I can do if I have an issue.
Right. So the education component of the commission's role is also going to be key.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's one thing to have it written in the Constitution, it's one thing to have it highlighted in the legislation, but because the commission is the one who's going to be carrying out the duties of the legislation, it's important that the commission explains fully their processes, because again, the legislation sets out the broad framework, but then when it comes to the processes and how they're going to approach the task, it's important that the commission educates persons as to the procedures, the different systems and processes that they have in place. And again, human rights, it might seem like a bit small word, but for some people it can be a little bit intimidating. So it's important that the commission break it down so that the average person can understand as well.
And just to interject here, that the commission or the complaint made and the commission's work is confidential.
Wow.
It's that's provided for in the legislation. So whatever you go there and complain about, except for the investigation, etc., it's confidential.
Well, as we wind down, we're just about out of time. One of the things that I want to touch on as we speak about this commission is who will eventually make up this commission, who is, according to this piece of legislation, proposed legislation, will be able to be nominated. Can you shed some light?
Yes, so as I think I mentioned some of it earlier. So 2 persons are nominated. So the governor does all the appointments for the commissioners. 2 persons nominated by the governor, 1 by the leader of the opposition, 1 by the chief justice. In total, 5 commissioners. And then P.S. Igwe mentioned the CEO. The CEO is really the chief executive officer, is really the person that will be in charge of the day-to-day running of the commission, and the commission will also have support staff as needed.
That's really good. And
one key thing about that I need to say, because we know we have to look out for our sister islands.
Oh yes, that's
everything that we do in terms of composition of committees. We try to make sure that we're inclusive. So the governor has 2 nominees, but one of them must come from one of the sister islands. Yeah. So I wanted to just mention that, because
that's really
many times the sister islands feel as if they're forgotten, but we want to let them know that it's with this legislation, as well as the good governance framework that we've been implementing for statutory board legislations, we are actually moving to the point where some legislations specify, but we are now moving where all of them will specify in terms of membership representation for the sister islands, especially for those that have open membership. Unlike some boards, like for example Financial Investigation Agency, that is really comprised of government officials. But as long as they have those that have members from the public, we are now moving to insist that it goes in the legislation to specify representation from sister islands. Some legislations have more. Some of them actually specify 1 from each sister island, the 4 main ones. But at least this, because of the size of it, is saying at least 1 member should be from the sister islands. Yeah.
Well, we have a good bit of public meetings upcoming, which are going to be announced in just a couple of days. And so all across the sister islands, the Virgin Gorda, Anegada, and Just Van Dyke will be holding meetings there. So those members will be able to come and hear a little bit and have their input. We'll be across the media. But as we prepare to close off this discussion today, any parting words from you two?
I'll just encourage persons to go through the legislation and submit the feedback so it can be taken on board for us to make any changes necessary before this bill goes forward.
The previous bill went through a lot of deferrals in the House of Assembly, and we're seeking to ensure that when this bill gets back to the House of Assembly, it reflects the feedback that has been received from this round of consultation. Because I can't speak to the level of consultation that would have happened back in 2014, 2015. But certainly we want to ensure, because even if we did consultation back then, you would need to do fresh consultations now, because so much has changed in the territory, and population has changed, Views have changed.
Yes.
People are now more alert in terms of things, paying attention to things that happen in the House of Assembly. So it's important for persons to understand that an opportunity is being provided so that you can give your input. This is just the beginning of the consultation phase. So as we move through the different communities, as different avenues are provided, it is important for persons to let their voices be heard. This is not a done deal. I want to stress that.
Yes.
It is not a done
We
deal
want to hear from you.
because I heard it on the radio yesterday
Wow.
that it has already been passed, and it has not been passed. We are still in the consultation phase. Before it even gets to the House, you have an opportunity to let your voices be heard so that when the bill gets to the House of Assembly, they will understand these are the areas that people had concerns with. These are the things that were adjusted based on the feedback that was received. So I want to encourage people, be a part of the process. This is
Yes.
our territory. We are the one
And
who
it's
have to
your
live
rights,
with
yeah.
every legislation that is passed. You have a human right, so take this opportunity to exercise your rights.
Thank you so much, PS. And I'd like to thank you both for taking the time to joining us for this initial discussion. Of course, as we continue and extend this process, which is going to be a territory-wide consultation process, we'll hear a lot more from you and a lot more from our other contributors who are helping to ensure that the territory understands this bill and what it means for them. And I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for tuning in to this very special GIS report. If you'd like to read this entire piece of legislation, view the consultation schedule, or virtually submit your written feedback, please visit bvi.gov.vg/human rights. Once again, that's bvi.gov.vg/human rights. For the Office of the Deputy Governor, I've been Eusa Z. Adams. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you next time.